Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my show. My name is Jason DeCosta, and this is Consistent Preterism. Thank you for joining me today. Hope everybody's doing well out there, battling a bit of a cold, driving on the highway in a cargo van at the moment. And, excuse me, and just wanted to rant a little, so if it's a little loud, that's why. So I'm driving down the road in a rectangular tin box that could implode at any moment. But anyways, wanted to talk today about something that one of my commenters on the channel brought to my attention and reminded me of recently, and that is the concept of marriage and divorce in the Bible. Now, my channel here on YouTube is designed for those who have a pretty good biblical understanding, right? It's not your average channel where, you know, the guy who just goes to church potlucks can walk in and, and say, hey, I'm going to understand everything this kid's talking about. No, not at all. Actually, this channel requires a pretty good understanding of words, understanding of concepts, understanding of themes and motifs in the Bible, understanding of the Old Testament especially, the promises that are back at the Old Testament, the foundational definitions that we've received back in the Old Testament, the, come on man, get out of my way, the trajectory of the Old Testament. This channel requires that you understand that, at least to a fair extent. So if you don't, you're probably going to be a little bit lost and a little bit behind, and that's okay, but you shouldn't, come on trying to teach me and trying to comment and correct me in my ways when in fact you're the one that's miles behind in terms of understanding the Bible and what it says. So I'll start out by saying that. Now, this marriage motif in the Bible is pretty much always depicted between the God of Israel and his people Israel. They were married throughout the story. Or pictured as married throughout the story. They were pictured as being divorced, or God giving Israel a bill of divorcement anytime Israel committed idolatry or adultery, meaning they commingled with foreign nations. They worship idols and creeping things and molded images, and this was all pictured and symbolized as adultery, meaning violating the marriage contract that they had with their God, right? And God was a husband to them. This is all the imagery that we're given throughout the entire Bible. And if you're unaware of that, that's probably an indicator that you don't know your Old Testament well enough. So anyway, we have this imagery throughout, and we have these pictures and stories of Israel committing adultery, cheating on their God, violating the covenant contract, because after all, that's what marriage is. It's a covenant between two people or two parties, and that's what God had with Israel. He had a covenant with them that he would bless them and multiply them, and they would be highly favored above all peoples of the earth, and they were his chosen, the apple of his eye. He loved them higher than all else. He did not choose anyone else out of the whole earth. He chose Israel. There's all these statements about this covenant, and this covenant was centered upon the law of Moses, and that was sort of like, the legal aspect of it. But there was these promises of curse and blessing outlined specifically at the end of Deuteronomy. I believe it's chapters 28 to 32-ish. But that's the foundation for the curse, right? Paul said, as many as are of the works of the law, that's the law of Moses, are under the curse of the law, or are under the curse, he says. So Paul actually defines who's under the curse. It's those who are under the law of Moses. Hence why he says Christ came into the law to redeem those under the law. And so there's this curse and blessing motif that runs throughout the whole story, and we often see Israel banished from their land, taken in captivity, exiled, whatever you'd like to call it. But this is portrayed in the Old Testament as God divorcing them. But there's always these promises of God gathering them back, and loving them once again and restoring them and seeking them out from every nation where he has driven them, and all these, great restoration promises throughout. And so when we get to the end of the story, we have this, bridegroom imagery and, this wedding banquet imagery. And then at the very end of Revelation, we have this imagery of this New Jerusalem prepared as a bride, right, for God, adorned as a bride for God. And so there's this theme, this symbolism, if you will, of restored marriage, right, of reconciliation. Maybe that's why Paul said this was a ministry of reconciliation. There's this theme of God forgiving the cheating, God forgiving the adultery, and taking back his first true love. And what's interesting is when you consider in the Old Testament how many times this God banished Israel because of adultery, or exiled Israel because of adultery, or punished Israel because of adultery, and you consider just how important this topic was to this God, right? Adultery seems to be one of the more, hush-hush or no type things that you could do with this God. Like, that was a big deal, and he took it very seriously, and we see that throughout. There's numerous statements in the prophets about, how they played the lover, with many idols. And that's basically all adultery symbolism, violating the marriage contract. So now my question is, and this person made me think on this when he commented a few weeks ago, a month ago, whenever it was. My question would be, considering how important God, or how crucial this, staying faithful and being committed was to this God, right? I mean, this was the marriage covenant. And God really took that seriously, the God of Israel did. So much so that he would banish his own people. He would judge his own people if they violated that covenant contract. And considering how important the Bible shows that it was to this God, that being faithfulness to the marriage covenant, what would make anyone think that the marriage that's taking place at the end, that the New Jerusalem prepared as a bride adorned for God, that the wedding feast, that the banquet, that all of these things were with pagan, foreign peoples? If God took adultery that seriously in the Old Testament, then God takes adultery that seriously at the end. Therefore, I.O. has another ironclad point, because it shows that the ones being married to God in the end were the children of Israel. It was the kingdom of Israel restoration. Will you at this time restore the kingdom to Israel? Acts chapter 1, as it's about to kick off. Israel was the kingdom, and Israel was being restored. All 12 tribes from near and far. And that kingdom would be delivered to God as a bride in the end. Prepared for God as a bride. So, if you argue that the city or the New Jerusalem or the people of God that are being saved and gathered in at the end of the story in the last days, if you argue that those are pagan nations, that those are foreigners who never knew this God, that those are ones who never had a relationship, so therefore would not need a ministry of reconciliation, as Paul called the last days gospel mission for the sheep. If you argue for that, then you're going straight against everything that the Bible outlines about how this God felt about adultery, how this God felt about marrying someone outside of the ones that he was in covenant with. God would not do that. This God, the God of the Bible, the God of Israel, would not do that. The God of Israel forgave. That's when you, let's put it this way. Okay, if you're married and you guys go through problems and you decide to separate, and even if you divorce that person, if you go back to that person, your relationship would be restored. There would be reconciliation between the two. All right? You would return to your love. And that's the theme of the New Testament. You would forgive that person for whatever wrong deeds they have done to you. whatever trespasses they have committed against you. You would forgive them if you took them back. And so here is God, through Christ, forgiving the people Israel of their sins, of their trespasses. Nailing the handwritten requirements of the law of Moses to the cross, he has taken them out of the way for them. This is the entire story of the New Testament last days. It is an ingathering of the elect, aka the chosen ones, aka the children of promise, aka the Israelites. They are being gathered from near and far, Jew first, then the Greek. And when the fullness of them from the nations came in, all Israel would be saved, because the nations was the second part of the gospel. It would go to Jew first, then them. So when the fullness of them came in, all Israel would be saved. And it would be at that point that the deliverer would come out of Zion and turn ungodliness away from Jacob. For this is my covenant with Jacob when I take away Jacob's sins. Notice the foreign nations are not in there. This is a forgiveness story. It's a reconciliation story. It's a restoration story. It's a coming back to Papa Goad story. Shout out Matthew Simon. I'm sure he's still delusional as ever. This is a marriage restoration story. So to think that the end of the story, after this long journey, after the ups and downs, after the trials and tribulations, after the scatterings, the banishments, the exiles, the captivities, the restorations, the bringing back to Jerusalem's, all the history that this God had with his people, to think that at the very end, that God is going to change direction and now allow himself to be married to foreign nations whom he never knew, is pretty asinine, if you ask me. Folks, I hope you enjoyed it. That's all I got for you. Just wanted to make you consider a few things there. If you liked it, give it a like a Rooski. If not, you know the drill. And we'll catch you on the next one. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.